Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Would You Rather. So, this is a 2012 film that it seems that you can conveniently watch in a number of apps. First, I'm going to say the free route, and then without a doubt, you can go ahead and decide alternate routes in case you have money and affordability and whichever to you. So, one, there is an app that I've been using fairly reliably called Fox HD Movies. That seems to be an app that I've usually been using. So you can probably search those words and eventually come up with an app that has a logo that says Fox HD Movies. Then alongside it has another title that doesn't exactly match the words Fox HD Movies, and you can download that and watch this for absolutely free. Or you could probably go on to YouTube or eventually go on and get like subscriptions to Sling TV from Amazon, and maybe that might have a free trial or something like that. I didn't go into that route to eventually, without a doubt, watch Would You Rather. But yeah, there's options there. You can watch on YouTube or probably any number of things. Probably Vudu probably will have it also, probably. So, let's tee this up. Without a doubt, what is this movie about? So, this movie is to be about a number of people that, for one reason or another, are to be in a hefty amount of debt. And so they otherwise all decide to go to this game and eventually play it not knowing really legitimately what the real risk of it is, that their life may be on the line, that they might be doing something that could eventually ruin their life some way or another, where it's all of a sudden to be electrocuted or have eventually a loss of eye or to be stabbed or any number of things like this kind of like uh, eventually, like, these people don't rationally assume that they are probably going to die within here because we have a guy named Shepard Lambrick who is to be played by Jeffrey Combs. A lot of people probably know him from any number of projects. Most notably, probably Reanimator. Brittany Snow, kind of the main focused character. I've seen her in a movie like The Vicious Kind or the Dave Bautista movie, as well as Brittany Snow, Bushwick. But like those might not be the most notable movies that she's ever been in, but those are the movies that I usually watch with Brittany Snow in it. Anyways, so pushing on. So these all people tend to surround this table, and eventually they are to go on and eat dinner. And even in like before this game even starts, they're kind of persuaded to do certain things, life altering things, to have money being placed on the line, but not enough money for them to get out of here, retire off of, or eventually just have all their debts be cleared off. So this movie is really interesting because like it's another kind of death game kind of scenario that we've seen kind of countless times through more recently Netflix shows like Squid Game or just like any number of kinds of things. But this is, of course, Would You Rather, which, of course, is kind of a play off of a internet game that eventually big, hefty, large YouTubers like a Jacksepticeye or a PewDiePie would have probably played at some point in time. So, going into this, let's go out of our way to say, yeah, like I think we've kind of teed it up and kind of explained this movie because I know I went into like very vague terms about this film, but like really it's a pretty simple movie where eventually you get all these people in this room. They play a game that they're not really aware of the rules, and eventually, one by one, eventually they start dropping like flies. Because eventually it is to come down to having one person be the winner out of all this. So someone is going to die in the process. That's the sad thing about this game, is it dwindles down to one. So with that said, let's go out of our way to just go into spoilers. Because reasonably, I'll just kind of explain the movie as long we go to really get us to understand why these people would probably do this game because they are in desperate need of money. So let's go out of our way to go into that double five time territory because it's that customary time again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we spoil this movie. I apologize about the vagueness of the way I described this movie. I was like, like it's like people. It's either they're interested or they're not interested. Uh, like basically, it's like even watching a trailer, like the movie is pretty self-explanatory. But like really, any of the details that are to be mentioned further on from what I said is just basically just why not just talk about it in spoilers? So, because not anything else is all that interested besides what all I said. So let's go into this. Uh, so we end up having Iris, who is to have, I guess, been left this home from her parents, and it seems like she is to be increasingly in debt. And plus, it doesn't really help all that much that her brother is to need a bone marrow transplant, and so Iris is trying to like work or find a decent job or any just kind of job, and it seems that no one will hire her, and so Iris is to try and get this gig at waitressing, but when she ends up going to this uh, this job, uh, God, what is the perfect word? Job kind of seeking thing when she ends up talking to the people of this place to get this job. Uh, they end up saying it's like, well, maybe we can probably find a job for you. Maybe at like the very like least, it might be like a hostess job. And so Iris is like, well, great. That's gonna be great. That's gonna work out. So eventually, Iris is to go on and eventually get a call from the doctor, Dr. Barton, and he is to have supposedly figured out a way to have cut costs from, I guess, all the medical bills and all the stuff that's kind of dealing with her brother. And so she's like, well, I'm going to go and to this doctor's office and see what he is to like tell me to just kind of help us out. So uh, Iris is to go on to this doctor's office, and so the doctor is to mention that there is to be a guy named Lambrick that is to be able to provide uh, someone money for basically the rest of their life. Like, for the rest of their life, this person will fund this person for anything that they are to ever need. Like if it's to be like something as stupid or as simple as like, oh, I need 100 cherries delivered to my house right now. Like Lamperk will be like, okay, I'll figure out somebody to get that done. Like they'll never need or want for anything, but they end up have to go through this game and win to be able to do so. And so really when you're thinking like going into a game, how many players is there? Like how high are the stakes? And eventually Iris really isn't thinking about that. She's just thinking like, well, like I could really help out my brother. I could probably really be able to like if I win this game, then I'll be able to uh, like get anything that I've ever wanted. Like you kind of have to weigh uh, like the kind of pros and cons between this, and so Lamprick is to go on and say. to this girl because Iris is to be like, well, like, could I think on this? And Lamprick is like, well, we have a game coming, or we have a game going on tonight. And so if you change your mind, give this number a jingle and we'll go and pick you up. And you can go ahead and we can have you do this game. So Iris is to eventually go home and to just kind of ponder the fact about this game. And evidently she has proof of a winner before because evidently this doctor who is offering her this opportunity had won this game previously. So she's like, okay, maybe like this isn't as bad as like obviously if there's already been a winner, like so like maybe I can be the one person out of all this. So but Iris is still kind of back and forthing it about this. So Iris is to eventually get a call from her job opportunity, and they ended up declining her being hired in this job. Like nowadays, you would probably just get an email just saying like, "Oh, sorry, we're disinterested" or something like that. Like very often, like you won't really get that much of a phone call anymore. Um, but like that's optional. Sometimes you can probably just get like a phone call where they're just like, "No, I'm sorry," and then you're like, oh, "Okay, well, whatever." So but yeah, so Iris doesn't like is really just like, well, I guess there's nowhere to really go but do this game, and so Iris is to tell her brother, well, hey, like I'm gonna go off with supposedly some friends tonight and just kind of like let my hair loose and whatever, and just kind of like and just kind of go and do this. And her brother is like, well, good for you, yeah, go ahead and just kind of have fun, go out there and do whatever. So we end up having this bit of dialogue where Iris's brother is to kind of mention how like aren't you just kind of frustrated about like kind of dealing with me? Like aren't you like isn't this just kind of a burden for you to have to deal with this consistently? Like having to deal with this guy's medical problems and everything like that. Like don't you want your life so much easier and so on and so forth? And so Iris is like, no, like it's fine. It's completely fine. And every time she's like, well, it's completely fine. So like there's a lot of times where it's just like, yeah, like wouldn't you just be like, wouldn't it always just be nice to have that person that's just like, oh, it's fine, because it's like usually like you would end up having to be that person where it's like, oh no, it's fine, it's whatever. And so like, wouldn't it be nice for you to have that person that's like, oh, just whatever, it's fine. It's like, yeah, like, but anyways, uh, life doesn't happen the way you want it to. Pushing on. So Iris decides to go on to this game, and she ends up finding out that there's a number of people here. It seems that there's to be both Lucas and a guy named Cal, who is to kind of fill us in on the backstory of all these characters when they head into this game. So we have a guy named Conway who is a recovering alcoholic who evidently had numerous debts. Travis is to be I guess, military guy who I guess he has numerous debts. And Linda evidently has a bunch of medical bills because evidently she is to be paralyzed, which is like she's this old lady. Uh, Amy, I'm not quite sure exactly what her bills are or her reason for kind of doing this, but like she must have some kind of reason. They end up kind of like saying that she's kind of probably out of everybody, she's probably the most unsavory character. Lucas doesn't really tell anybody why he's here until the very end, but even that, we don't get the whole story, let's just say. Um, but we just have to naturally assume everybody is some kind of debt, some kind of something. Uh, so let's push on. So we go into dinner, and so we have starting to have people eat certain kind of meats, potatoes, whichever. all of a sudden Iris is to politely ask, it's like, well, excuse me, I'm sorry, but like, I'm actually a vegetarian and I can't actually eat this food. Is there like an alternative meal that you can give me? And Lamprick is like, well, this kind of creates an interesting opportunity. Well, Iris, would you want to play a game here right now where uh, if we give you a decent payoff, which is like 10 grand, will you go and like throw everything that you've been doing since the start of your whole life and go and eat that piece of meat for $10,000? And so Iris is like, and so Iris goes and eats the thing of meat, and like she doesn't Ralph or barf it up or whatever. And so they give her the $10,000, and so it's like, okay, all right, like so, like we're starting to see that people will eventually, when money's on the table, like everything that they have known since their whole life, like might adjust or change or whichever. To where like if they're a vegetarian, like here's the thing of meat, and chow down. So all of a sudden, the next contestant is Conway, who is actually John Hurt, which I remember him. Like a lot of people remember him from like Home Alones and like Chud. Well, I would like, uh, but yeah, like sadly to hear that like he like recently like passed away, but like man, I really enjoyed John Hurt. Or Heard. Um, Really just an interesting character whenever he was in like a film, and like this character also being in here like was kind of really interesting also. So Conway was to also be like kind of a little part of this game, but like the real game hasn't really kicked off because like people have the ability to at the very beginning of this, before the game really kicks off, to decide to leave before this whole thing starts. So Conway is to uh, be asked by Lambrick. It's like, well, hey, I see that you're not drinking your wine. And Conway's like, well, of course not, because like I've been 16 years sober. And supposedly 16 years ago he had been a very much an alcoholic, and like so uh like after that whole him stopping drinking, like evidently he got his life supposedly on track. And Lamprick is like, your life is on track? Like, man, I could have like, how bad was your life 16 years ago that now it's like on track? Like you're still in debt and any number of problems with you. Like, how is it that your life is on track? So, so Lambrick is to persuade Conway. It's like, well, since you have a hesitation about drinking this alcohol, how about we go and we give you a temptation of drinking this thing of scotch or this thing of wine that's next to you? And so Conway has a hesitation, but like a long stretch of hesitation. But eventually he ends up deciding to drink the scotch, and he like starting to seem like really drunk, to where he's like, or he's like kind of falling over and he's kind of hunched over. So, and I thought that that was like really interesting, just kind of like trying to play drunk or whatever. So all of a sudden, like people are just like, wow, like this game is like really like this game is really like a life changing thing. And so Lambrick is like, well, the game hasn't even really started yet. Like we just like kind of have been testing certain people to see if they would do the things that they were to do or not, because they kept throwing money at Conway, and so Conway just decided that he was going to go and drink this alcohol. So now Lambrick is now, after everyone is to seemingly be done eating, Lambrick is like, okay then, well, I think now is the time for us to ask people if they want to leave or if they want to stay to play this game or not. Like, this is going to be like your last chance to decide whether or not to be in this game or not. And so Conway ends up standing up, grabbing the money, and then he ends up sitting back down and to just kind of like tease us if someone is going to leave. Because usually there's always some one person that eventually decides to leave, and then all of a sudden, like, it seems that everybody is starting to like kind of sway of whether or not they want to leave. But it seems like everybody was just raring to go to be in this game. So Lampert was like, okay, well, like, this is now, like, we're doing this game, so everyone understand that. So now we have a guy who is to be named Bevins, who is to bring in this electroshock device, and then everybody's like, whoa, what? Like, we didn't think they were going to get electrified, and Lampert is like, well, this is the game. Like, this is, this is to, like, what it, like, we were going to have to dwindle everything down to one person, so, like, so, we end up having two people getting these, like, heads, like, these headset things on, like, that look like they're just kind of belts in these two pieces. These two metal pieces, and so now everyone has to decide from either the chair next to them or themselves whether or not that they are going to electrify either themselves or the other person. And so I think the first person, I think, was Cal. So I think it was Cal and Amy that were the first ones up. And so, so Cal, I think, ends up shocking himself. And then it switches to Amy's turn, and Amy easily goes and shocks Linda, who's the old lady that's sitting next to her. And then eventually, Linda is to decide whether or not Peter gets shocked, and of course, obviously, Peter gets shocked. So, Peter then, I think, has to decide whether Travis gets shocked, and I think Travis ends up getting shocked. And then Lucas has to decide, Travis has to decide whether Lucas gets shocked, and Lucas is like, okay, I can get shocked. And yeah, I don't think a lot of people end up going twice. So, I know Lucas ends up going twice. And then so Lucas has to decide whether Iris gets shocked, and Lucas shocks himself. And then so I think Iris has to decide whether Cal is going to get shocked again, or she's going to shock herself, and she ends up shocking herself. And Lampert is like, okay, well done, everybody. Like, we start to have certain people, like, decide to leave, and Conway, after finding out that they were going to get shocked, decides right after that that he is going to leave. That's why he didn't participate in this round. So he decides he's going to take his money and leave because that's insane. And so once he is to start leaving to get out of this place, they end up shooting him in the head and killing him because that's what's to happen every time someone is to get eliminated. They are to either like die from whatever they're doing, or they are to eventually get shot, because that's what happens to everyone who eventually gets eliminated one way or the other. So it's either die or do whatever you're told to do. We had Linda, who ended up almost kind of like passing out because of her getting electrically shocked. So let me pause here. Let me do a bit of a reset. All right. So Lampert, before this all gets started, Lampert is to tell his son Julian, who's watching this. Lampert is telling Julian that he's just there to observe, and so that's what all he does. And So all of a sudden in this round, they end up starting to get this like kind of plastic wrap and starting to like place it all over the room. And so we have Julian kind of come back in as they're kind of prepping for stuff. And so all of a sudden, Travis is to tell Julian that he deserves some respect from Julian because Julian is going around calling all these people piggies. And also, it's like, hey, like, we're gonna provide for you for the rest of your life. Like we're gonna pay every single cent of anything you would ever want, and like that deserves respect. That I am going to like bestow this upon you. And Travis is like, well, hey, I was in the military, and I'm like playing this game, so you need to respect me also. And Julian is like, oh, well, thank you for your service, but yeah, I guess I should probably like let's give him respect. So Julian walks off and then comes back in. Everybody is to set up for the next round. So the next round is to be the option of I think Iris I think is to go first because they have to prep her about what exactly to do here. So Iris was the one to go last in the last round, so she has to go first now. So the thing of it is that she uh, she has to decide whether she is going to whip Travis or stab somebody in the thigh. And evidently Lucas, I guess, is some doctor because he is to just kind of mention some like medical stuff. Or it seems like he always knows what he's talking about throughout most of this movie for whatever reason. So is to mention to people, it's like, hey, if you stab someone in the knee, you can like hit a carotid artery, and you could that person could bleed out. That person could die, like right here. So what ends up happening is Iris is like, well, like I guess I'll whip Travis, and so like Travis is like, oh, okay, I think I can take it, and Lamprecht is like, this is going to hurt Travis. So Iris goes and is trying to like kind of flimsy hit him, and they're like, no, we can't accept that. Like you actually have to go and like really snap into it, and so they end up kind of like showing her how to do it because she has to do it the right way. So Iris is to go in and like hit him like three times perfectly, sadly enough. And so then Travis is to just be like, oh, well, I guess that's probably like it for me, right? So uh, they all of a sudden continue to alternate people in, and so uh, eventually the next person, who I think is Cal, is to also decide to go and just whip Travis three times. And then so like I think the next person is to be Amy, and Amy, who is to really just realize that everyone is eventually going to have to get eliminated anyways. And so she's like, well, I'm going to stab somebody of my choosing. And they're like, okay. So Amy decides to just stab Iris because she really just does not like her. And so they're like, okay, okie dokie, all right. Uh, so the next person who is to go up is to be Linda, and or no wait, maybe the next person to go up is Peter, because I don't think eventually Linda eventually or no wait, Linda does get a turn and she ends up deciding to stab Amy, or kind of just scratch her. I don't think she actually ends up stabbing her. So uh, Peter's turn is now up, and so Peter is to tell Linda that Travis probably can't get whipped anymore. Like it's getting to the point where he's like he had almost fallen over, and like they don't even think that he's coherent anymore. And so or no, wait, maybe Cal goes last. Yeah, maybe Cal goes last because I know Cal eventually goes and whips Travis. But Peter ends up going and stabbing Linda in the leg, and she ends up bleeding out and she ends up dying. So she's dead. So that's sad. And Cal goes and whips Travis and kills him off. So both Travis and Linda are both dead. So we have at some points in time where these people are to maybe possibly strategize to think that they can probably run out of here or escape or whatever. And people make that stupid mistake where it's like, dude, like, there's a number of people here. Like, what are you really going to do to, like, really just escape all this? Like, that just kind of seems, like, irrational. So, what ends up happening is that eventually people try to make a break for it, but they don't get really far. Cal is to go off and try to whip Lamprick, and he ends up getting shot. Uh, some of the guys all try to go and like take guns away from all the guards, and Iris goes for a run for it, and it ends up that Julian tries to run after her, and then goes and grabs her, gets on top of her, and starts punching her and beating her, and then kissing her inappropriately. And so Iris ends up stabbing Julian in the leg, and so we end up having Dr. Barden, who is to arrive at this mansion to say, hey, Iris, I'm going to rescue you from all this. I decided that this was a mistake that I had made, and I'm going to help you. All of a sudden, we end up having Bevins, who ends up shooting Dr. Barden, and then Bevins is like, okay, well, like, come with me, Iris, we have to finish this game. And so evidently Julian is to be taken off to a room to, I'm assuming, address his wounds, or just shoot him in the head or kill him off anyways, because maybe Lamprick decided to do that because it's like you had one job and you didn't do that. So because supposedly there was a time or two before where Julian had gotten a little handsy with the contestants. So anyways, so what eventually happens is Bevins explains to Lamprick what what was going on with Iris, and so Lamprick goes out to see his son, and then goes back to Iris and is like, you know what, I'm sorry about what had happened. Like he's bizarrely trying to comfort her, and like there's nothing he can do or say to just really just like help this situation because this girl's gonna come back to die anyways. So now the next round is to be either you go and you hold your breath into this water barrel for seemingly X amount of minutes, or you are to do what is to be in this mystery card. And I'm like, well, what if every single person were to survive the very first round, and like would they have kept going and kept getting cards and forced people to stay under the water longer? Like what would have happened if everyone would have stayed alive during that very first like round of this? What would have happened? I don't think I want to know. But anyways, pushing on. So what ends up happening is that Peter, I think, well, it doesn't matter who's the one up. I can just explain what happens to everybody. But I think Peter is the first one up on this. So Peter evidently had been a gambler, and evidently he had some gambling debts. So Peter was trying to gamble and try to figure out like do the whole like Princess Bride scenario about like the poison that's either in his goblet or in the other guy's. And so like we just have Peter who's trying to figure out. It's like, well, like you probably know that I probably won't be able to hold my breath for 2 minutes, but you know that I can't like go and figure out exactly what's in this card, and could it could possibly be my greatest fear, and so on. So Peter just decides, F it, like I'll just do the card. And so we end up finding out that there is to be supposedly a firecracker that is to have to be held into Peter's hand. And so he's just like, well, okay, like, but we end up finding out that this firecracker isn't quite all that fire or cracker. It seems to be much bigger than just a seemingly firecracker. So Peter just holds this up into his hand, and like Lucas's dimension, it's like, well, hey, just like let it go at the perfect time. And they're like, oh no 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 no, like no, we're gonna have him like this thing is gonna be taped inside of his hand, and he's gonna indefinitely hold on to it. So like he just tries to put his hand away from the rest of his body, and so the fire or the firework thing ends up going off into Peter's hand, the firecracker esh like thing that was like a massive firecracker. And so Peter all of a sudden falls to the ground, and I guess because of the shock of that whole thing, that he was possibly going to like just like he was going to die from this moment, he ended up having a heart attack, and he ended up keeling over anyways. So like I guess from the trauma of this being like a thing that exploded upon his hand, all of a sudden Peter had a heart attack and died. I'm like, well, that's like that sucks, but like, would he have really had a heart attack? But I don't know. I guess like he probably would. He probably would have bled out anyways, because it doesn't really seem that they're gonna have like, hey, like we're just gonna like nurse you up right here and now. So now let's cover it. So Lucas is to go up, and so he is to decide that he doesn't want to hold his breath underwater, that he is going to do the card. And his card is that he's going to have to take a razor blade to his eye and cut a part of his eye. And so Lucas is like, Jesus. And so he has 30 seconds to do this thing. There's like a mirror in place and everything for this guy to cut his own eye. And so with 10 seconds remaining, he quickly cuts his eye and does the thing that they want him to do. And so he holds like a towel or something, a towelette, or probably just like probably just his tie to his eye, while it's like swelling up. So now we go on to Iris, and so Iris is like, dude, I'm not gonna do whatever this task is. She decides that she's going to hold her breath for 2 minutes in this water barrel, and so she is to go and be put into this water barrel. Luckily, she had held her breath at the perfect time, and so like all of a sudden she's like really struggling to hold her water, or to hold her head under this water, but we have Bevins who's holding her down consistently to where she's not going anywhere. So miraculously she was able to hold her breath for 2 minutes, and they were just like kind of like, wow, like you have some serious lungs on you. Like the whole entire time really just Iris was thinking about her brother the whole time, and like, and so her brother was coming up with this kind of story, and so she was only just thinking of her brother and the story that he had. So Iris is now seemingly done with this round, so now Amy is to get her card, and I guess she's not bleeding out from her stabbing incident. So Amy is to just go, it's like, well, like, I don't know if I can hold my breath for 2 minutes, so I'll just go and do what's on the card. So she ends up opening the card and finding out that that it has a barrel in it and it has a 4 in it. And she's like, well, what does that mean? And so they're like, oh, wow. Like, yeah. So Amy is to have to hold her breath for 4 minutes. Like, supposedly, it doesn't quite cut it, like, close to the world record for holding your breath. But so Amy is going to have to now go in and hold her breath under this barrel for 4 minutes instead of the 2. So Amy gets thrusted into the barrel, I guess without breathing. Iris is to say, like, hey, she wasn't prepared to go underwater. And they're like, she's gonna die anyways, like, sadly. So eventually, Amy is to be held underwater for those 4 minutes. And eventually, she ends up getting, of course, lifted up, and she ends up falling over. And she's like, yeah, she drowned. She's dead. She's drowned. She dead. Sadly. Sasha Grey, it's too bad. Like, I remember seeing Sasha Grey in this Elijah Wood movie called, I think it was like Open Window or something like that. But, like, I actually liked that movie. It's actually really interesting. Go ahead and check it out if you want to figure out how to see a movie called Open Window. I'm not 100% sure that that's the title either, but go ahead and, like, Google it and IMDb Sasha Grey or Elijah Wood and be able to figure that out. So now everyone is to be, like, kind of dealt with. So the only two that are left are now Iris and Lucas. And so now this is the final round, and Lamprecht is like, yeah, like, we're finally like finishing this up, because I think they wanted to try and, like, speed this up as quickly as possible because this is taking too long. Because, like, a whole 30 seconds to have to decide all of this stuff, or X, like, they're taking forever to do any number of these things. So the very last round, Lamprecht is to mention that supposedly whoever is to be able to get the choice first usually is the one that ends up winning this game. And so they have it be an even thing where they end up deciding upon a coin flip who is to be the decider of all this. So, and that ends up being Iris, who is to decide what is to happen. So, remind you, both Iris and Lucas are the only two left. So, Iris is to be given a kind of seemingly like an old-fashioned kind of gun with one round being put into it. And so her choice is that, one, her and Lucas could run off and eventually have no money to their name given to them by these guys. Like, they're not going to go and they're not going to win, but at least they'll be left with their lives. Or Iris has the choice of shooting Lucas and then being taken care of for the rest of her life. And so Lamprecht is like, okay, Iris, decide. So I'm like, wait a minute, so Lucas won't even get a turn if this works out poorly, but either way, he's not going to get a turn. So Lucas is at first, like, telling Iris, it's like, well, hey, like, Iris, you and me, we can leave. Like, aren't you excited about that? Like, come on, we can now leave. Like, we've been trying to escape anyways. We've been trying to, like figure out how we can leave and escape and whatever. And Iris is just like, is dead silent, and she's just staring at Lucas. And then Lucas is like, okay, so I guess I guess that didn't work. So Lucas is like, well, hey, like I think you ended up telling me that evidently your brother was to be the reason why you came here. Well, like, I also have 3 sisters. Lucas is to be shot. Lucas is to be killed by Iris, and so Iris wins the game, and so Iris is to be given huge chunks of money within this briefcase, and Lamperk is to confirm to Iris that there is to be a donor already in like Romania that is to be able to help Iris's brother, and so the surgery will be done within the week. And so Iris gets all this money, and so Lamperk is like, well, like, don't I get like some kind of thank you or something like that? And so Iris is just like, thank you, Mr. Lamperk. And he's like, no, no, you can call me Shepard, or you can call me Shep, or something like that, some kind of cute little nickname, as Iris is to just like walk off after this and to head on home. And I'm like, shouldn't Iris be probably or possibly be bleeding out? Like, where was she stabbed at? Like, is she gonna die anytime soon? So, but here, like, we haven't gotten even to the saddest part about all this. So Iris did all of this solely for her brother. Like, if anything, she probably could have gotten by. She, like, things could have worked out, whatever. But Lamberg was to mention to Iris that, like, they could basically, like, do anything they needed for Iris, meaning that the donor list for her brother could be done within a snap, and that, like, this girl would never have a worry in the world. So, because her brother needs a bone marrow transplant, and evidently Iris was not a perfect match for her brother. So Iris is to go on home, I guess, to eventually tell probably her brother the truth, probably to tell him that, hey, I risked my life to save yours, and like now we're gonna just retire on a tropical island and sip mojitos for probably the rest of our life, and like everything's gonna be super, and you're gonna get your bone marrow transplant and all is gonna work all that well. When Iris is to head home, she ends up going and noticing that her brother is asleep. So Iris is to try to wake her brother to just kind of tell him the news, to tell him probably the whole truth. She ends up finding out that her brother is dead. That he ended up doing any kind of something to eventually take his own life. So eventually Iris would not have to like, I guess, like, have to go and continue to try and find some way of helping out her brother. So, like, even when there is victory, there is still defeat. To where the whole main reason why Iris went and did this whole thing was to turn around and to see that one thing of why she did this, risked her life and everything, to eventually see that reason being snuffed out, and it was beyond her control. So I was like, wow, that has just got to be a real wow, that is really just like so sad, and just so like she really did like have to do any number of things to have almost died to eventually come home to that, sadly. And so that's like the movie just ends, and I'm like, wow. So all that to eventually just have hardship. Like, I bet that this woman was to eventually just maybe regret this decision, or any number of things. Who knows? Like, it would be interesting to eventually see, like, there to be like a time elapsing kind of thing, where all of a sudden we end up seeing like a month later or 2 months later, and see where like Iris is at or where her mind is at or whichever. But yeah, they don't do that in this movie. So that's it. So I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.